Alrighty then.
Извините, где находится ближайший шоколад-магазин?
Can you just ask where the nearest chocolate factory was?
Chocolate shop,
That's
yes.
close enough. Okay, so you're my stepfather, because they can't tell that because this is an audio recording. When were you born?
A long time ago, in the 50s.
Okay. So during the height of Cold War, early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
you were in what, like your early, maybe late 20s, I'm guessing?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Did the Cold War affect your day-to-day life in any significant or memorable ways?
In the 80s, not so much. In the 70s, I was aware of things like intercontinental ballistic missiles and countermeasure and counter value and what that meant as far as the U.S. military forces and the Soviet military forces. So on a day-to-day basis, maybe not so much, but it was constantly something I was constantly aware of.
Okay, I remember that we talked earlier and you said that you did a report on the Cuban Missile Crisis. How large of like a news story was that at the time?
At the time, it wasn't anything that I was aware of because I was like maybe 5 years old. But my parents did talk about, when I was doing the report, they talked about how disruptive that was to their life and how there was a period of several days where they had no idea whether or not there was going to be all-out war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, which could have escalated into nuclear weapons.
Okay. Looking back on it now, from your current perspective,
Mm-hmm.
how likely did you think that nuclear war was actually going to happen?
I think there were moments when it was more likely than normal. For the most part, I don't think it was likely because I believe both sides, and that was part of one of the terms was mutually assured destruction. And I think both sides believed that there was a reasonable doubt that they had the ability to do first strike and take out retaliatory measures. So the specter was always there, and there was always the concern that if one side felt that they were in a position that they were really superior or that they had nothing to lose, that could happen.
Okay, you were talking about the specter and how it wasn't really there, but you could still sort of feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice other people being affected by the specter also? Like, do you think that was just a personal thing for you, or do you think that everyone kind of knew that it's a possibility? Not a likely possibility, but a possibility nonetheless.
Oh, I think everybody understood that it was a possibility. It was something in the news. They talked about Minuteman missiles and then talked about strategic bomber wings and B-52s. So it was in the news. People were aware.
Okay, what would you say was the closest experience or like the most profound moment where you just thought to yourself, war's gonna happen, if that ever happened?
I don't know that I ever had a moment where I thought war was going to happen, that it was imminent or even close.
Okay. Let's see here.
Now, I did have a situation where growing up near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and knowing that they had a B-52 bomber wing stationed there, I did know that there was a list of targets and we were on it. At least it was close enough that it would have been a bad day.
A very abnormal growth sort of day, but a bad day.
Yeah.
Moving on to presidents during the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first off, like, how politically aware were you of, like, Nixon's policies and then Reagan's policies, Ford's policies?
Nixon's policies, I was more aware of his efforts to normalize relations with China as opposed to whatever he was doing with the Soviet Union. I was more aware of Reagan's efforts towards the Soviet Union.
Okay, what about, per se, Carter?
Carter, I think, was more interested in trying to develop détente as some more of a peaceful relations. But part of when I think of Carter, I think back to the Iranian hostage.
And with the Iranian hostage crisis, how large of a news event was that? Because you said that you didn't really know about the missile crisis, but obviously you've aged over time, so how much more aware were you of that situation?
A lot more because, like I said, the missile crisis happened when I was about 5 years old, so I had no real concept of that going on at the time, but the Iranian hostage crisis, I was well aware of that happening, and there was also the joke at the time, what's flat and glows on election day, and this is referring to when Reagan was running for president in his first term, and the answer was Iran, because the thought was that once Reagan took office, he wasn't going to fool around, he was going to go in there and nuke Iran. That was the joke, but there was also the understanding that he wasn't going to mess around.
Okay, for Reagan as a president during that time, do you think that his sort of policy of using really sort of macho gestures to make sure that the Soviets understood that he meant business and sort of making them think that he always had his hand over the button, do you think that that was the correct way to deal with the Soviets at the time, or do you think that there could have been a better, more peaceful way to approach the Soviets?
It's difficult for me to say that there's a better way, since Reagan's efforts, I think, demonstrably led to the ultimate downfall of the Soviet Union and the break apart of the Soviet Union. Could he have approached things in a more peaceful way? Probably. Would it have had the effect that his approach took? I don't think so. Certainly, I don't believe it would have been nearly as effective in the time frame.
Okay. And then any last thoughts or comments that you want to add?
It's kind of difficult to really understand what it felt like to be during the Cold War, because it's something that's always in the background at that time. I mean, I grew up with the idea that you did have some drills on what to do in case of a nuclear attack, what you're supposed to do, which was kind of silly. I mean, have you ever had anything like that? It says, this is what you do.
Not for nukes, no.
Drop and cover. That was what we were taught.
Covering underneath the desk will help so much.
Well, if you're far enough distance away, it would help, because the flash could blind you, could do bad things for you.
Yeah,
and if you were
shaking the earth could cause debris or
Mhm.
to crumble or something.
Yeah.
But if a nuke goes off like 2 miles out, I don't think that.
you won't know.
Well, you have a point there, but still, I don't think that desks magically protect against radiation from the sky.
No. Nope.
Okay, moving on to a slightly different topic, not necessarily Cold War.
Mhm.
Let's move on to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you during Vietnam? That was like late 60s, early 70s, so you were in your teens?
Mm-hmm. I was old enough that I was required to register for the draft. The draft registration requirements ceased shortly after I turned 18. So had I been, say, a few months younger, I don't believe I would have been required to register for the draft, but I did have to register.
Okay, were you in support of, or did you not particularly care of, or were you completely apathetic towards the war and its objectives?
It was at that time for me more of a personal idea of not wanting to have to go over to Vietnam and fight in a war and possibly be killed.
Okay, let's see here. This is not necessarily for an educational purpose, but this is just kind of a fun purpose. Were you a hippie?
Define hippie.
Sort of person to go out there wearing a leather jacket with the long hair and the sunglasses and go, peace, man.
I did not have a leather jacket.
Did you have long hair?
Yes.
Can I see a picture?
We can probably find one.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think that's about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.